I found out that my girlfriend was cheating on me with an employee of my uncle's company, and I came up with a plan. My name's Nathan, I'm 30 now, and I grew up in a very average middle-class family in Ohio. Nothing crazy, not rich, not struggling, just the kind of background where you knew if you wanted something, you had to work for it yourself. That's pretty much how I've lived my whole life. I paid my way through college by juggling a scholarship during the day and working part-time campus jobs at night. I cleaned classrooms, stocked shelves at the bookstore, even did a semester-long stint helping the IT department fix broken printers. Not glamorous, but it paid the bills and kept me moving forward. 3 years ago, something unexpected happened. I met Madison. She was 27 then, worked in marketing, and we crossed paths totally by accident at this charity food festival one weekend. I wasn't even planning to go, but my roommate bailed on his shift volunteering and somehow convinced me to cover for him. I was manning a booth for a local shelter, handing out flyers and directing people to the donation tent. Madison came striding over with this ridiculous confidence, practically dragging her friends behind her. I'll be honest, she was mesmerizing right off the bat. She had this way of commanding attention without even trying, like she just expected the world to rearrange itself around her. She smiled, joked around with me a little, and within the first 5 minutes, she had somehow managed to critique nearly every food stand within sight. I remember standing there, listening to her tear apart the overcooked sliders and watery lemonade, thinking, wow, she's kind of a snob, but damn if she isn't magnetic. We talked for a while, mostly her talking and me listening. Before she left, she handed me her card, a glossy little thing with her name in bold letters, Madison Hayes, brand strategy specialist, and told me to call her sometime if I wanted to see what real food tasted like. I waited a few days before reaching out. I wasn't exactly Mr. Confident back then. When I finally texted her, she responded almost immediately with a dinner suggestion, and not just any dinner. She picked this high-end restaurant downtown that I had only ever walked past and stared at through the windows like a broke college kid. The kind of place where the cheapest cocktail cost half a shift's wages. I debated whether I could even afford it, but in the end, I figured, screw it. Opportunities like this didn't come around often. Our first dinner, it was something else. She showed up in this sleek black dress, looking like she belonged in a magazine ad, while I sat there in my best button-down, feeling like a fraud. She barely glanced at the menu before ordering a cocktail. When it arrived, she sniffed it once, made a face like she'd just smelled a dumpster, and sent it back without blinking. The second one came, and again, she wrinkled her nose, flagged down the bartender, and returned it too, louder this time, like she wanted the whole restaurant to know. I was mortified, sitting there, the Ohio boy who was used to saying thank you and tipping 20% no matter what. Madison, though, was totally unfazed. She acted like it was her right to get exactly what she wanted, and honestly, everyone around us seemed to just comply. The food came, and thankfully, she didn't send that back, but she still found plenty to critique. The garnish on her dish wasn't fresh enough, the sauce was too heavy, the presentation was uninspired. I barely touched my plate, too tense to eat, and when the bill came, she waved it off like it was obvious I'd be paying. Walking out of there, part of me wanted to run the other way. I mean, who makes a scene twice over cocktails on a first date? But there was another part of me, the stubborn part, maybe the foolish part, that was hooked. She was unlike anyone I'd ever met. 6 months after that first chaotic dinner, Madison moved in with me. It wasn't a huge conversation, not really. She just started leaving more and more of her stuff around. First a toothbrush, then drawers full of clothes, then her espresso machine that needed its own dedicated space on the counter. One night, she showed up with 2 suitcases and said her lease was up and she didn't see the point in paying rent somewhere else when she was already spending every night at my place. I didn't argue. Honestly, it felt like the natural next step, and I was a little flattered that she wanted to live with me. Things changed fast after that. Within the first week, she started talking about the furniture like it was offensive. My couch, which I'd bought secondhand but had cleaned and taken care of, was, in her words, tragically outdated. The coffee table was student housing chic, and she couldn't believe I was still using the dining chairs that came from a discount warehouse in Columbus. At first, I laughed it off. I knew my place wasn't winning any design awards, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture had a story. I'd furnished that apartment bit by bit, usually by saving up for weeks or finding a good deal online. It was modest, but it felt like home. But Madison saw it as a project. Within a month, she had replaced almost everything in the living room. She brought in this massive velvet sofa, cream-colored, impossible to keep clean, and a glass coffee table that made me nervous every time I set a cup down. She bought these absurdly expensive rugs with weird patterns and names I couldn't pronounce, and then lectured me about not walking on them with shoes, even though it was my apartment. When I asked if we could maybe go halfsies on some of these upgrades, especially the ones she was choosing without even asking me, she tilted her head like I'd just insulted her personally. She said, and I quote, "I'm making an emotional investment here, Nathan. I'm upgrading both of our lives." And that was supposed to be the end of it. If I pushed the topic, she got cold, accusing me of being small-minded and petty, of not appreciating how much energy she was putting into transforming our home into something livable. She made it sound like I'd been squatting in a garage until she swooped in to rescue me. So I let it go. I started footing the bills quietly. She'd find something she couldn't live without, and I'd just pull out my card. A $1,200 media console, a $300 floor lamp that looked like an art installation but didn't give off enough light to read by. She redecorated the bedroom too, new sheets, new bed frame, curtains from some boutique I'd never heard of. She threw out the alarm clock I'd had since college and replaced it with this digital thing that played ambient sounds and glowed softly in the mornings to simulate sunrise. It cost more than my entire first month's rent in that place. Every time I brought up the idea of budgeting or even just slowing down, she turned it into a character flaw. "You always think small," she'd say. "You want to live like you're still in college. This is about building a real life together, Nathan. Don't you get that?" And I wanted to. I really did. I thought maybe this was what growth looked like. Uncomfortable and a little expensive, but ultimately worth it. Maybe I was just being stubborn. Maybe letting her take the lead wasn't the worst idea. So I stopped fighting it. I worked longer hours, took on extra projects, and watched my bank account shrink as our apartment started looking more like a showroom than a place anyone actually lived in. But something about it always felt off. It didn't feel like mine anymore. Madison worked in marketing, though if you asked her, she'd call herself a brand visionary, a term I never really understood but learned not to question. From the outside, it seemed like she had everything going for her: a strong resume, charisma that could fill a room, and enough confidence to convince strangers she knew exactly what she was doing. But underneath all that shine, she couldn't seem to hold on to a job for more than a few months at a time. Every new position started the same way. She'd come home from her first day brimming with excitement, talking about how this was the place that finally recognized her value, how the company was forward-thinking and in desperate need of someone with her perspective. That optimism never lasted long. By the third or fourth week, she'd start hinting at problems: a boss who didn't get it, coworkers who were threatened by her ideas, management that had no clue how to run a brand campaign. She'd talk at length about the toxic culture and how she was the only one with a clear vision. Eventually, she'd either quit or get quietly pushed out, and every time, it was someone else's fault. There was always a reason why she couldn't succeed there: because the team was mediocre, because the leadership was too traditional, or because she was just too advanced for them. The only place she really wanted to work, the place she talked about constantly like it was the holy grail of corporate America, was Aurora Dynamics. She mentioned it in every conversation about her career, always saying that it was where she belonged, where she would finally be able to show the full range of her strategic genius. She applied the first time about a year into our relationship and didn't get past the second interview. When she got the rejection email, she paced the apartment for hours, ranting about how the recruiter clearly felt threatened by her presence, how they were afraid of change and didn't understand the kind of value she brought to the table. She tried again 6 months later. This time she was sure she'd nailed it. She bought a new blazer, practiced interview questions for days, and even made me sit through mock interviews with her where she interrupted halfway through to critique my energy. I remember coming home the day of her final interview to find her on the couch with a glass of wine already half empty, staring at her phone like it had personally betrayed her. She didn't get the job again, and once more it was because the system was rigged, and they only hired safe choices who wouldn't challenge the status quo. She said the woman who interviewed her was clearly intimidated and the company would regret it once they realized what they'd passed on. The third attempt came not long after, and I think that was the one that hit her the hardest. She barely spoke for 2 days after the rejection came through. When she finally did, she said Aurora Dynamics clearly had a vendetta against her, that they were probably blacklisting her in some unwritten HR network because she stood up for herself during the interview. I asked, gently, if maybe there was some feedback she could take from the experiences, something she could work on or shift in her approach. She looked at me like I'd just told her I didn't believe in her, like I'd taken the side of the enemy. From then on, anytime I tried to talk about career goals or stability, she'd shut it down with a wave of her hand and say, "You wouldn't understand, Nathan. You've never had to deal with being too smart for the room." I wanted to support her, but it got harder and harder to watch her burn through opportunities and then rewrite the story every time to make herself the victim. It was exhausting, but by then, I'd gotten used to walking on eggshells. I stopped asking questions and just nodded when she told me the world was against her again. Over time, things started to shift, or maybe I just started noticing what had been there all along. Madison had a way of making everything feel like it was about her, not in the loud, obvious way, but in the slow, steady erosion of boundaries and expectations. It became clear in the little things first, like when we went out to brunch one Sunday and her coffee wasn't hot enough. Instead of just asking for a new one, she snapped at the waiter like he'd personally insulted her intelligence, lecturing him loudly about proper service standards and how, in her words, a place that can't even serve hot coffee shouldn't be in business. I sat there quietly, too embarrassed to make eye contact with the poor guy, while Madison acted like she was doing him a favor by calling him out. At first, I tried to chalk it up to stress or a bad day, but those moments kept piling up. She once threw a mini fit at a small family-owned bakery because they were out of the gluten-free croissant she liked, talking to the teenage cashier like she was some kind of incompetent idiot. I watched these things unfold with a strange mix of disbelief and guilt. Guilt because I didn't say anything, because I didn't want to set her off or start another argument in public. But it wasn't just how she treated strangers. When we went to visit my parents, which wasn't often because she always had an excuse, work stress, not feeling well, needing personal space, she barely engaged at all. My mom would be telling a story about her garden, or my dad would be trying to ask her questions about her work, and Madison would just sit there thumbing through her phone, scrolling like none of it mattered. She didn't even pretend to listen. Once, she actually laughed at something on her screen while my dad was talking about his recent back surgery. No apology, no acknowledgement. She just kept scrolling, completely detached from the room. But the real kicker was how different the rules were when the situation was reversed. If we were out with her friends, and we often were, because Madison liked to host these perfectly curated dinner parties where everything from the lighting to the background playlist had to be just right, I wasn't allowed to look at my phone for more than a second. If I so much as checked a message, she'd shoot me this look across the table, the kind that could stop your heart, and later she'd pull me aside and accuse me of being rude or distant, of not caring enough about the people who mattered to her. She had this way of twisting the narrative so fast I couldn't keep up. Her friends were important, and I needed to show them respect, but my family didn't warrant the same attention. Her time was precious, and if she was upset or tired, it was understandable, but if I zoned out for a minute during one of her rants about office politics or a failed interview, she'd call me out for being emotionally unavailable. It was exhausting. I started feeling like I was constantly failing at some unspoken test, one where the rules kept changing and I never got the answer key. 3 months before our wedding, things started getting weird in a way I couldn't quite explain at first, but that heavy, unsettled feeling in my gut never went away. Madison suddenly had a string of late, work nights that came out of nowhere. Up until then, she'd always complained about how inefficient and uninspired her coworkers were, how nothing meaningful ever happened after 5 p.m., but now she was out until 10 or 11, claiming there were urgent presentations to prepare or last-minute strategy sessions with clients who were high-profile and couldn't be scheduled during regular hours. At first, I didn't question it. I wanted to believe her, because the alternative meant entertaining thoughts I didn't want to let in. But it didn't take long for the inconsistencies to start stacking up. One night, she left saying she had a client dinner in the city and came back hours later than expected with no receipt, no takeout box, no details, just a vague comment about how exhausting the meeting was. When I asked who it was with, she brushed it off, said I wouldn't know them, and acted annoyed that I even asked. Then she changed the password on her phone. No warning, no explanation, just one day I picked it up to check the time and got met with a lock screen I'd never seen before. When I asked about it, she shrugged and said she had to change it for work reasons because of some vague security protocol. That might have made sense if she actually had a consistent job with a structured environment, but the story didn't line up. Still, I didn't press. I told myself I trusted her, that she was under stress, that planning a wedding was overwhelming. But then came the bathroom calls. She'd get texts late at night, glance at them, and say it was just work before grabbing her phone and heading into the bathroom. She'd turn on the shower or the sink, always something to mask sound, and stay in there for 20 or 30 minutes, sometimes longer. I'd be lying if I said I didn't listen at the door once or twice, trying to catch a voice or anything at all, but the running water drowned everything out. When she came out, she'd act like nothing happened, like it was normal to have private calls at midnight while hiding behind bathroom tiles and faucet noise. The part that really got to me, though, was when she started clearing her chats. She'd sit next to me on the couch, phone tilted slightly away, and I'd see her open her message threads and one by one swipe them into oblivion. When I asked what she was doing, she laughed, too loudly, and said she was cleaning up her memory, that her phone was running slow and she needed to declutter. I might have believed that if it happened once, maybe twice, but it became a ritual. Every night, like clockwork, clearing messages she supposedly didn't need while keeping that screen just far enough from my eyes. I didn't want to admit it then, but the trust I'd been holding on to like a lifeline was starting to unravel. I couldn't prove anything, not yet, but something inside me knew. This wasn't just stress or coincidence. Something was wrong, and I was too afraid to say it out loud. One night, during what was supposed to be a quiet dinner at home, Madison put down her fork mid-bite and said there was something she needed to talk to me about. Her tone was calm, like she'd rehearsed it, and immediately I felt my stomach tighten. She said she wanted to meet with her ex, Caleb, a name I vaguely remembered from an early conversation, one she described dismissively back then as someone who lacked drive and couldn't handle her ambition. Now, though, she said they had unfinished business, and she needed to see him one last time, to close out past issues so she could walk into our marriage with a clean heart. Before I could even respond, she pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot of a message from him on LinkedIn. It was short, maybe 2 sentences, and it said something like, "Hey, I've been thinking about you lately. I miss your outlook on life. Would be nice to catch up if you're open to it." She presented it like it was harmless, like it was actually a sign of her emotional maturity that she wanted to address lingering connections before we got married. She smiled, like this was her being responsible, noble even, and said she owed it to both of us to have that conversation. I sat there nodding, trying to keep my expression steady, even though I could feel every part of me tensing. The words "clean heart" echoed in my head like some kind of strange script. She made it sound like a spiritual cleanse, like this was some ceremony she had to perform before committing to me, and I didn't know how to argue against something framed so neatly in the language of closure and growth. Inside, though, I hated the idea. The way she said his name, the way she framed the message, the way she didn't even hesitate to accept it. It didn't feel right. But I also didn't want to seem insecure or controlling, or like the jealous fiancé who couldn't handle his partner having a history. Madison had a way of turning any concern into a weakness, and I could already imagine the conversation if I pushed back. Her accusing me of being threatened by a message on LinkedIn, of not trusting her, of being the kind of man who tries to police who she talks to. So I said okay. I said I understood. I even forced a smile and told her I appreciated her honesty, and she nodded like she'd won something. Not in a smug way, but in that calm, Madison-like way where she always seemed to assume her logic was flawless and unchallengeable. I picked at the rest of my food, nodded when she talked about how freeing it would feel to tie up emotional loose ends, and pretended like my chest wasn't slowly tightening with every word. That night, while she slept soundly beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering why the person I was about to marry felt the need to revisit someone she'd supposedly left in the past. The day she was supposed to meet Caleb, I came home from work a little early, hoping I could catch her before she left, maybe just see her off with a hug, something normal to make the whole thing feel less strange. But as soon as I walked in, I could hear the hairdryer going and her playlist echoing through the bathroom door. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, not really reading anything. When she finally stepped out, she was wearing a tight-fitting black dress I'd never seen before, sleeveless, low-cut, the kind of dress I'd expect her to wear to a rooftop bar on a Friday night, not to a closure conversation with an ex. She didn't even look surprised to see me. She just smiled, tossed her hair over her shoulder, and asked if she looked okay. I managed a nod and some comment about how she looked great, but the words barely made it out. She spent another 20 minutes in front of the mirror, touching up her makeup, spraying perfume, checking her teeth, adjusting her neckline. The whole process felt excessive, too polished for something that was supposedly about emotional resolution and moving on. Right before she left, she grabbed her purse and, without looking at me, said over her shoulder, "Don't wait up, it might take a while." That was it. No kiss, no love you. Just a vague throwaway line like she was heading to a meeting that might run long. I stood in the living room after the door closed, still holding my coffee mug from earlier, feeling like I'd just been airbrushed out of the picture. I tried to distract myself, ended up hopping on Discord to game with a couple of friends. We were in the middle of a match when Travis, who's always paying attention to the little things, suddenly said, "Hey man, not to be weird, but is Madison listening to Desire by Meg Myers right now?" I paused mid-game, confused, and asked him what he meant. He said her Spotify status was showing on her profile. She must have forgotten to turn off the integration, and it was looping that song. I knew the track. It wasn't subtle. It was raw and intense, more about hunger and obsession than anything resembling closure. The kind of song that made you feel something in your chest, something messy and unfiltered. Hearing that it was playing while she was supposed to be sitting across from her ex, resolving old emotional baggage, made my skin go cold. I didn't say anything at first. I just sat there, headset half off, staring at the screen while Travis and the others kept talking in the background. I don't remember the rest of the game. My brain had gone somewhere else entirely, replaying every red flag I tried to ignore, wondering what kind of conversation ends with someone playing that song on repeat, and realizing I might have made a mistake I couldn't unmake. She came home at 4 in the morning. I hadn't slept, not even a minute. I kept telling myself I wasn't going to wait up, that I trusted her, but every time I tried to close my eyes, my brain replayed that song, that dress, the way she walked out the door like I was just background noise. I stayed on the couch in the dark, lights off, just staring at the door, hoping maybe if she saw me still awake, she'd offer up some kind of explanation before I had to ask. When she finally walked in, the lock clicked quietly like she was trying not to wake anyone. She didn't notice me sitting there at first. She was barefoot, heels in one hand, her purse dangling from the other, makeup smeared under her eyes like she'd either cried or just stopped caring at some point during the night. What hit me harder than all that was the scent. Cologne, not mine, sharper and unfamiliar, the kind that clings to skin and doesn't come off easily. She froze when she saw me, just for a second, and then gave a tired smile, like I was overreacting by being awake. "Hey," she said, her voice scratchy casual. "Didn't think you'd still be up." I didn't respond. I just watched her walk past me toward the bathroom. She didn't offer anything, no details, no explanation. The sound of the shower started a few minutes later, and I just sat there, staring at the hallway like it might suddenly tell me the truth. The next morning, she acted like nothing happened. She got up late, made coffee, hummed to herself in the kitchen like it was any other Saturday. I waited until she sat down with her mug before asking how it went. She smiled over the rim of her cup and said, "It was good. We just talked for a while, caught up. Nothing dramatic." I asked where they went, and she paused for half a second, just long enough that I caught it, then said, "Some new little cafe near the waterfront. I think it's called Ember House or something." I nodded like I believed her, but I didn't. I Googled it later while she was in the shower. No results. No website. No listing. No new cafes by that name in the entire city. I even checked local business directories, social media, anything. Nothing came up. There was no Ember House. She had looked me in the eye and fed me a lie without flinching. And the worst part was, I didn't even feel surprised. Just empty. Like I'd been waiting for confirmation of something I already knew but didn't want to admit. After that night, something in me shifted. I stopped making excuses in my head and started paying attention to the pattern, the lies, the inconsistencies that had piled up over the months. I didn't confront her right away. I wasn't ready for whatever would come out of her mouth. But I couldn't just sit in that apartment pretending everything was fine while my instincts were screaming at me. So I did something I hadn't planned on doing, something I never thought I'd have to. I called my Uncle Sam. He's my mom's older brother, a quiet guy, one of those people who doesn't talk much unless he has something worth saying. He's been the CTO at Aurora Dynamics for the last 10 years, and we've always had a good relationship, even if we don't talk often. What Madison didn't know, what I hadn't told her, was that it was because of him that she even got the chance to interview there a few months ago. I'd reached out to Sam back in January, asked if he could help me pull a few strings behind the scenes as a surprise. She'd been talking about Aurora nonstop, and I thought maybe after the wedding, it would be a perfect way to start that next chapter together. A new job, a fresh opportunity, something big she could finally be proud of. I never told her about the connection. I wanted it to feel like she'd earned it on her own. But that morning, I called Sam and asked if we could meet. He was in town for a couple of days, staying at a hotel near the conference center, and we sat down over black coffee in the hotel lounge. No small talk, just the low hum of other business travelers in the background. I told him everything, not all the drama, just enough. I asked him directly if Caleb worked at Aurora Dynamics. Sam raised an eyebrow, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Yeah, Caleb Wyatt. Project management. Been there about 2 years. Good at talking his way into things, not great at delivering." I didn't need to hear anything else. But then he added something that hit me like a punch in the throat. "Your girlfriend's been seen around lately. With him. He's been talking a lot about mentoring someone on the side. Off the record, of course." I asked him what that meant, and he gave me a look I'd only seen once before, years ago when I was caught lying to my parents about failing a calculus exam. Disappointed, but calm. Like he already knew where this was going. "It means," he said slowly, "that your surprise may have backfired. He's been helping her, sure, but not through HR. Not through the channels we use for serious candidates." My mouth went dry. I sat there, trying to make sense of it. All those late nights, the cologne, the song, the invented cafe. It wasn't just emotional confusion or closure. She wasn't lost. She wasn't healing. She was networking. I don't know what hit harder, the betrayal or the fact that I had unknowingly opened the door for it to happen. I thought I was giving her a gift. I thought I was helping her chase a dream. But it turned out, she was already using another way in, one that had nothing to do with her resume or my support. Caleb was her shortcut now, and I was just the guy footing the bills and watching it unfold from the sidelines. The day of the interview, I woke up feeling like I'd crossed some invisible line in my own head. No more pretending, no more waiting for things to fix themselves. Madison had been bragging the night before about how she'd finally gotten another shot at Aurora Dynamics, how this time she was collaborating on a presentation with someone who really understood her value. She never said Caleb's name directly, but she didn't have to. Her whole face lit up in a way it never did when she talked about me. That was all the confirmation I needed. I called Travis that morning and asked him to come with me. He didn't even hesitate. He'd seen enough over the past few months to know something was seriously off, and when I told him Sam had arranged a time for us to visit the office, he just said, "Tell me when to be there." We arrived at Aurora around 10:30. Sam met us in the lobby, cool and collected as always, wearing a navy blazer and that calm, unreadable expression he always had in tense situations. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded once and led us past the reception desk, through 2 sets of glass doors, and into the boardroom on the 4th floor. Inside, there were about 10 people seated around a long table, all dressed in suits and business casual. Madison was standing near the screen at the front of the room, holding a tablet, mid-sentence, while Caleb hovered beside her with that smug, half-leaning on the table posture people use when they want to look effortless. Their presentation slides were up on the monitor, something about digital brand repositioning and user funnels, but everything froze the second the door opened and Sam stepped in with me and Travis right behind him. Sam cleared his throat and said, "Apologies for the interruption, everyone. I'd like to introduce my nephew, Nathan, and his colleague. They'll just be observing for a moment." The room went quiet. Caleb's face went pale almost instantly. Madison looked like someone had knocked the air out of her. She blinked, then looked at me, then back at Sam, and for a full 5 seconds, she didn't say a word. Her mouth opened slightly, like she was going to speak, but no sound came out. That's when Sam walked to the head of the table and said, "Before we continue, I want to address something. Caleb Wyatt is currently under internal investigation for misappropriation of company funds related to off-contract consulting agreements. We've been looking into irregularities tied to personal use of corporate resources." The words hit the room like a bomb. A few board members exchanged glances. One of them started typing furiously on a laptop, and Caleb stiffened like he'd been physically hit. I watched Madison in that moment, waiting for some kind of reaction, denial, outrage, confusion, but instead, she just stared ahead, completely frozen. Her hands were still gripping the tablet, but her knuckles had turned white. She didn't move. She didn't sit. She didn't speak. She just stood there in the middle of the room, silent and exposed, like someone caught in a dream they didn't know how to wake up from. No one said her name. No one needed to. The association was already clear. Sam turned to me and gave a small nod, then looked back at the table and said, "We'll be following up on this matter further. I suggest we reschedule this presentation." Then he turned and walked out. I followed, Travis behind me, and we left Madison behind in that room, still standing, still gripping the tablet like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She didn't look at me again. She didn't have to. Everything she had built on that lie collapsed right there in front of everyone, and all I felt as I walked away was a strange, quiet relief. I canceled the wedding the next day. There wasn't a dramatic confrontation or some drawn-out conversation filled with accusations. I just packed up the engagement ring, left it on the kitchen counter next to the wedding planner's folder, and walked out. Madison texted me a few hours later, short, almost clinical, "I understand. I'm sorry." That was the last I heard from her directly. What I didn't expect was the fallout from her father. 2 days after I called it off, he emailed me a spreadsheet. A real one, with tabs and color-coded cells, labeled "Expenses related to Madison and Nathan's wedding." I opened it on my phone and stared at it in disbelief. There were line items for everything from the cake tasting deposit to prepaid calligraphy lessons for the wedding invitations. But the one that stood out, the one I had to read twice, was listed as down payment. Wedding Range Rover, mandatory bridal vehicle, with a 5-figure number next to it. I didn't even know a Range Rover had been purchased. Apparently, Madison and her parents had decided that no wedding of their social circle was complete without the bride arriving in a white luxury SUV, complete with ribbon and custom license plate. At the bottom of the spreadsheet, there was a note. "As you initiated the cancellation, we expect full reimbursement of shared and bride-specific expenses." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how absurdly out of touch it was. Madison had lied to me for months, manipulated me, built an entire secondary relationship behind my back, and now her father wanted me to bankroll the vehicle she was apparently going to arrive in to marry me under false pretenses. That's when Travis stepped in. He'd been quiet for most of it, giving me space, but once I showed him the email, he took it personally. He was finishing law school at the time and already working under a professor at a local firm, so he knew exactly how to handle it. I gave him access to everything. The messages, the screenshots, the evidence from the night she came home smelling like someone else, the text messages, the proof from Sam, even the original LinkedIn message from Caleb that started the whole mess. Travis drafted a formal legal response that shut it down completely. He attached a polite but firm letter, citing evidence of infidelity, misrepresentation, and a clear pattern of emotional manipulation that, if pressed, could lead to a counterclaim for damages. He made it clear that any attempt to pursue reimbursement would not only fail, but risk exposing Madison's actions to broader legal scrutiny, especially given the overlap with a corporate investigation. We never heard from her father again. The Range Rover disappeared from the conversation like it had never existed. And just like that, everything tied to that wedding, the venues, the outfits, the guest list, the flower arrangements she'd obsessed over, evaporated. No threats, no legal follow-ups, no lingering mess. Just silence. A few months after everything fell apart, I started rebuilding, not just the routine of my life, but the way I thought about it, the way I felt in my own skin. The first thing I did was sell the engagement ring. I didn't keep it as a reminder or throw it into a river like some dramatic movie scene. I walked into a small jeweler downtown, handed it over without a speech, and took the money without hesitation. It felt like removing a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying around. With part of that money, I bought an old Chevrolet Camaro, black, 1973, rust in all the wrong places and a busted carburetor, and I loved it instantly. I spent weekends tearing it apart in a friend's garage, oil under my nails, music blasting, and no one asking me why I wasn't doing something more productive with my time. Every bolt I replaced, every dent I smoothed out felt like patching a hole inside myself I hadn't known how to fix before. Then came Buster. I adopted him from a shelter not far from where Travis lived. He was this scruffy, wiry mutt with a crooked tail and one ear that never stood up straight. I named him Buster after our Discord channel, the same one where Travis had first spotted Madison's Spotify status that night, the moment everything started unraveling. It felt right, like honoring the strange little detail that helped me stop pretending. Buster became my shadow. He came with me to the garage, to the park, even sat in the passenger seat of the Camaro once it was roadworthy again. He didn't care about what I'd been through, didn't want an explanation or a summary. He just showed up, tail wagging, always ready for the next walk or the next ride. There was something healing in that kind of presence, constant, uncomplicated, and completely real. I went back to the gym, started running again, joined a local soccer league I dropped out of years ago when work got too busy. I surrounded myself with people who didn't expect anything from me except honesty, and slowly, something shifted. I stopped replaying old conversations in my head. I stopped wondering how Madison had justified it all to herself, or if Caleb was still lying his way through someone else's life. I didn't need answers. I didn't need closure. Because what I had now was freedom. I had peace in the mornings, good coffee, sore legs from real workouts, grease-stained jeans from the Camaro, and a dog who lost his mind with joy every time I came home. I had new people in my life who made space for me, who didn't measure love in control or manipulation. It wasn't perfect. Nothing is. But it was mine. And that's where I'll leave it. Thanks for sticking with me through all of this. I'd love to hear what you think. Have you ever had someone in your life twist things so well that you almost didn't recognize yourself by the end? What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Drop your thoughts below. I'm genuinely curious to hear how others would have handled it.